Hello, everybody at Grange. This Friday is April the 22nd, and it's actually a very special day because April the 22nd in 1993, which was a very long time ago, something really terribly tragic happened. A young man who was only 18 at the time was waiting at a bus stop, and he was a bright, athletic young man. He had a lot of hopes for the future. And he lived with his parents, he lived with a younger brother and sister, and unfortunately, very, very tragically and very sadly, he was killed by 6 men. And when it was investigated, it was found the only reason he was killed was because of the color of his skin, because he was a young black man. And the really sad thing about it was that afterwards, people had to look very, very hard in this country. There was an inquiry led by somebody called Sir William Macpherson, and he found out that a lot of what had happened was down to institutional racism, that there is racism in our institutions, in our organizations. And what he dealt with and what he had to deal with at the time in his inquiry and finding out was that the police force, unfortunately, was really affected by racism, and they did not do a good job in terms of catching the killers of Stephen Lawrence and bringing them to justice. But out of every terrible tragedy, we can only do our best to bring out good and to realize that through the terrible tragedy of the loss of life of Stephen Lawrence, in this country, we had to face up to really important issues such as institutional racism. And although a lot of time has passed since then, we've improved things and we're still improving things, and we're having the courage to face up to things like institutional racism and not just dismiss them, but realize that we have to treat everybody with equality, but more importantly with equity, give everybody the dignity they deserve, and that we should never ever discriminate against anybody on the basis of the color of their skin. Because when we have racism, when we have discrimination, it might just be a joke or a comment, but what it ultimately leads to is the loss of life when we discriminate against people based on race. So anyway, I was looking in the library, and I found in our library in Grange today, and I found this book, The Life of Stephen Lawrence. We even had a few copies in our library, so I thought each night this week I might read a little bit from this book and help us to remember Stephen's life, and in that way always be champions for equity. One other interesting thing is that Stephen's younger brother's named Stuart, and he published a book last year, and we bought a copy for Grange, and it's in the year 6. I think it's in Park's class, Stuart's book, about how he coped with the loss and the death of Stephen, and how Stuart has now grown up into a man who is a champion of youth and equity and equality, and just everybody succeeding in life with humanity. So the book's called The Life of Stephen Lawrence. It's written by Verna Lett Wilkins and illustrated by Lynn Wiley. And on the cover, yes, there's photographs of Stephen, of a young Stephen. And the book starts and it says, "Peace is not the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. Without justice, there will be no peace." And that's a quote from Martin Luther King. And here's Elvin Udoro, who remembers his best friend Stephen Lawrence, and he says, "I liked Stephen. We had some good times together. He was a great walker, and what a runner. He ran the Greenwich 1988 mini marathon to raise money to help children. He was 14 years old when he did that. He always liked helping people. I remember the time we walked all the way from New Cross to Grove Park. I desperately wanted to get on a bus or a train, but no, Stephen just kept on walking fast. I was knocked out with tiredness when we finally arrived, but Stephen wasn't tired. He could have kept going, he could, but that'll never happen again. It's all over now, says Elvin, remembering Stephen. But Stephen's memory lives on in our commitment to championing humanity and equity and inclusion and anti-racism, and especially making sure that we all treat each other the right way. So here's chapter 1, A Life Cut Short. And I'll just read chapter 1 tonight. Stephen Lawrence was born on the 13th of September 1974 at the Greenwich District Hospital in London. His parents were born in Jamaica in the Caribbean. His father, Neville, emigrated to England in 1960. Stephen's mother, Doreen, arrived 2 years later to join her mother in England. Neville and Doreen met in London in 1970. At that time, Neville worked in a leather factory making clothes, and Doreen worked as a bank clerk. After they married, the Lawrences settled in Plumstead in southeast London, and Stephen was their first child. Stephen's parents kept strong ties with family and friends in Jamaica, and as soon as all their relatives in England had seen him, Doreen took Stephen to Jamaica to visit his grandmother, Neville's mother. They spent 4 wonderful weeks in the sun, and Stephen celebrated his first birthday in Jamaica. It was there that he took his first few steps and immediately tried to run. Only 17 years later, Stephen's parents made the same journey back to Jamaica, this time to bury him. So for all of us, let's make April the 22nd a special day to remember Stephen's life and to use Stephen's memory to inspire us to do our bit to make a world of equity, of inclusion, of dignity for all human beings, of championing a world that we really want to see and would have loved Stephen to have been able to grow up into and see.